Everybody. Hope you are doing well today. My name is Henry McCoy. I have the pleasure of being a co-host of this great event. I'm a professor of entrepreneurship at North Carolina Central University, which is a historically Black college here in Durham, North Carolina. We're neighbors with Duke University. I'm at the NCCU School of Business, where I lead the entrepreneurship program and also am the managing director for our Angel Network. Again, something that we have a partnership with Duke on. And so we're happy today that hopefully you've been able to join us for the last several days for this important discussion around racial equity by design and racial inequity by design. Today, we're going to talk about the racial equity aspect by design, and it's wonderful to have you here. Just a couple of things before we move on to the panel. We have a great panel here today, have a great moderator. You may have been notified that even though the raise hand symbol is on, we will not be using that today. However, if you have questions that you would like for us to try to address, we have a Q&A feature that you can put the questions in, and I think they'll find a way to see if we can get to them before we get through this conversation. Also, I think after this event, there will be some kind of there will be a sharing of a link that you all can provide your feedback and things of that nature. And so, hopefully this will be an engaging conversation. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our wonderful moderator and let her take over. Ariel Powell she's an MBA here at Duke University. She's actually about to graduate, so we congratulate her on finishing up that degree and taking that talent on throughout the world. Before she came to Duke, she was doing wonderful things for the last 5 years, strategy consulting involved in innovation, and thus far she's been a key part of the Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation here at Duke, where she's a fellow. She's involved in the community. She's been on the Greater Durham Black Chamber of Commerce. She focused her work on really trying to reduce the barriers of entrepreneurship for people of color, particularly the Black community. And so she's a wonderful asset, and she's going to moderate us to a wonderful conversation. She's originally from Atlanta, went to Howard University to get her undergrad, so she has all the credentials we need. So Ariel, without further ado, turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Henry, for being here today and kicking us off on day 2 of the Equity Matters Conference. Everyone, guests, entrepreneurs, future entrepreneurs and doers, investors, students, faculty, and academic members, thank you for joining us for this extremely critical conversation on how we can look at the investing landscape and come up with some actual tactical solutions to make sure that it's equitable for Black and underrepresented entrepreneurs. So we're very excited. If you were able to join us yesterday, we had a great conversation where we learned some more history on the racial wealth gap and all of the different components that continue to present challenges for entrepreneurs and the major players. We learned how investors can kind of think about biases as well as other challenges that entrepreneurs face as far as wellness and health, as well as just making sure that they're resilient enough to kind of get in the door when you're underrepresented. So thank you for that great conversation. I think a great point that also came out yesterday was about intentionality. As we've noticed, there has been a lot of money that has been provided to push out and support initiatives in underrepresented entrepreneurs. And I think in today's conversation, we really want to ground it on the importance of intentionality and making sure that we are doing the right things to make sure that we're making the largest impact possible. So thank you for joining, and we're very excited. We have an amazing group of panelists here today who will be sharing how they've experienced this in practice and some tactical steps that we can all walk away with and be future champions in this space. So with that, we'll get started. I will say one thing, thank you to North Carolina Central and Duke. As Henry mentioned, I am a proud HBCU alum, HU, and I am extremely excited to see these collaborations on crucial topics. And I really believe by us combining our forces, we will just continue to make a larger impact. So thank you for that today, and really proud to sit on this intersection. And with that, I will go ahead and introduce our panelists for today. They are the ones that you want to see. I would not be able to do them justice by introducing them, so I will let them introduce themselves. One note I want to just share is, unfortunately, Melissa Bradley was not feeling that well today, but luckily she has appointed an excellent replacement today, and we're just really excited to have him here. So thank you for that. And with that, I will go ahead and allow each panelist to introduce themselves, tell us where you're currently located, and what programs and initiatives that you're working on, and how you're really making an impact in this space. And I will start by my screen with Gerald.
Well, hi there. So I am thrilled to be here. So I'm one of the co-founders of CircleIn. Our mission is to help make success more attainable and common and inclusive for all students everywhere. So I've raised $5 million in venture capital for the business to get us to the place we're at today. And we have this incredible vision to unite the world's next generation of 1 billion students to build the future of studying. So I'm thrilled to be here, have some insights. These are great people that are here around you, and I can't wait to open up and share.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gerald. And I will pass it over to Henry.
All right. Well, thanks again. So I'm Henry McCoy. I'm located in Durham, North Carolina. As I mentioned, I'm a professor of entrepreneurship, but in what I call my past life and even my current life, I was a banker for many years and been an investor and entrepreneur myself. And I always say that I got into the professorship because I wanted to hopefully teach students what I wish someone had been there to teach me about entrepreneurship when I was coming up. And so very happy to be here. Think that this is a critically important conversation when it comes to the capital side of Black entrepreneurship. And so I try to do what I can to address that and bring more capital to the space. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Henry. As you can see, we have a great perspectives. I will go ahead and transition it over to Ade.
Greetings, everybody. Happy Friday. First and foremost, I want to thank the team for pulling us together. This is a really important conversation, and also very grateful to be part of it. I'm here representing Melissa Bradley on behalf of the team at 1863 Ventures. So I'm a proud graduate of the Florida A&M University, did my undergrad and graduate there, business school, and then I'd worked in private equity before starting a couple businesses, and then joined 1863 about 4 years ago. Our work is really focused on elevating the new majority entrepreneurs of color, women, through entrepreneurship, right? So our goal in the next 5 years is to create $100 billion worth of new wealth. We do that in 2 ways. We have an accelerator program where we work with companies across the spectrum in different industries that want to scale up their business, industry agnostic, right? So product companies, service companies, SaaS companies that have gone on to Y Combinator, Shark Tank, right? And so I think for us, it's about not only changing the narrative, but helping our founders become more confident and data-driven operators. The other side of it is we recently announced a fund where we'll make strategic investments into founders that come through our program, have been de-risked, if you will, and are looking for some catalytic capital in order to grow and scale. But our work, wouldn't be possible if it weren't for our partners like Target, who we use in a strategic way to help get folks shelf space that they have in CPG company. We work with Capital One, which is a partner to help us kind of scale our national reach through our efforts. And even folks like Rodney, right? Like Rodney's been instrumental in helping to build capacity to have platforms like Shark Tank, et cetera, for Black and brown founders to excel. So we're just doing our part, and I'm really grateful.
Thank you. And just want to reiterate, really appreciate you jumping in and all the work that you're doing, and can't wait to hear your contributions on behalf of Melissa and the rest of 1863 Ventures. And with that, we will pass it. Of course. And with that, we will pass it to our last panelist, Rodney.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to Ariel for your work and diligence and literally wrangling everyone on this phone to come together for such an important conversation. And to my colleagues at Duke and UNC Chapel Hill, I'm excited to be a visiting professor for this season. I also serve as an adjunct at Morehouse College and have been instrumental in helping them to stand up their entrepreneurial ecosystem over the last 6 years or more. I'm a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution out of Washington, D.C., working in metropolitan policy there. Chairman and CEO of Opportunity Hub, an ecosystem building company, really a suite of companies focused on building local, hyperlocal, racial equity focused ecosystems throughout the nation. I'm a general partner in 100 Black Angels and Allies Fund. I've invested in 7 venture funds as a limited partner over the last decade and made about 30 direct investments in that time period as well. And a little historical fact, 20 plus years ago, I was first Black founder in the South to raise millions in venture capital, and that company was acquired in 2010. So glad to be having this conversation, and hopefully the next 20, I won't be an outlier. I'll just be a normalized dude that just happened to do something.
Thank you, Rodney. And absolutely, absolutely. I think we are at a point that we can make this decision to implement these actions to make sure that you are not an outlier and that it becomes normal to have diverse entrepreneurs and see the impact that we can make globally by listening and bringing together the best ideas and supporting everyone equitably. So thank you for that. I think that is a great segue to jump into our first more foundational question, which I'll just kind of open it up to the entire group. But what are some of the major gaps that you believe continue to prevent Black and underrepresented entrepreneurs from receiving investments?
It's a very loaded question because there's so many different both systemic and kind of process related things. So, one of the things that we all know and shouldn't be new is that, Black brilliance is not a unique thing. We see opportunities from all corners of the United States, but what's happening is that there's dislocation as it relates to ecosystems and communities, right? So just like Rodney's built an amazing community in Atlanta, not being plugged into that means that you may not be able to get that first enterprise opportunity or may not be able to get connected to that VC. And because so few Black GPs and Black investment professionals, there's really more founders looking for capital than I think there's, folks that are writing checks. And people may feel differently, but I think the consistent thing that we're seeing where founders have traction, founders have great ideas, but they lack the social capital and the connections to help them grow and scale. And so, one of the things that we're seeing is that it's changing. We're seeing more connective tissue forming between Atlanta hubs and DC hubs out in the Bay Area and down in Louisiana, right? And it starts with, folks starting companies, exiting from companies, becoming LPs, helping to raise up the next generation of investment professionals, and then changing that narrative. People don't look at Black and brown founders as different other than or increased amount of risk. We should be getting the same level of capital and have the same latitude of losing that capital as our white peers, right? And so let's say it's kind of a systemic thing, but it is absolutely changing, especially over the past few years with more communities, ecosystems, and investors coming together.
Well, I pick up on that. I think Adi's point is great. And I think, as I always say, this idea of Black entrepreneurs not being able to get access like that, I mean, it's a combination of things. But one of the things that I would point out is that I think there's still a mentality around this idea of trust. I think Connie Evans talked a little bit about it yesterday in that panel. But I still, to this day, kind of come across folks who think that diversity means having like one Black person in their portfolio, if that, right? I mean, that that you get to that point and, oh, I already have my Black female founder, so I'm good. We good, right? And that somehow you can't have more than that. And so I think there's still this kind of mental block that somehow, I don't know if you call it a quota system or just kind of a token system, or even just, well, hey, we're going to try this one and we're good. But I think you have to get away from that sense of that somehow, again, that this is so rare and unique that we could only find one person that could possibly even come close, and that this is not charity, but it's actually great investing. So a lot of that, I think, we still have to get over, or investors have to get over.
Just to chime in there, there are really, I guess, two sides to this coin. And transparently, I'll say, racism always involves economics. From chattel slavery to private equity, it always involves economics at play, which is different from bias and discrimination. I may have bias, or I may have discrimination, but if I cannot economically impact or withhold from you, then that in itself is not a pure definition of racism. And so the power to withhold capital because of faulty views or just old ideas, stereotypes, is really the purest form of capitalistic racism in America today. And to Henry's point, diversity, equity, inclusion solutions, operationalized in a business is the key to dismantling that personal institutional racism. The data supports it. The data shows, when their founders, from ethnic backgrounds, economic output is 35% more. As a limited partner, investing in a venture fund or investor directly in the company, and my goal is to get a return. And you're telling me that if I invest in Black and Brown, Indigenous and new firms led by those people, that I have a 35% greater chance of getting my money back in a return. I'm like, why wouldn't every venture capitalist in the world do that? When there are women, in tribute to Women's History Month, at the table is 15%. So if it's a Black woman, I'm going to argue that it's 45%, right? So I think the data definitely supports it. And so through exposure and education, and definitely the archetypes, to Adae's point, when we see the Topes of the world, when we see the Lee Squares of the world, when we see the Squires of the world, when we see these archetypes, the Sheena Allens, the Fearless Funds, when we see folks executing in the asset class, it makes a difference, because a lot of investors, candidly, are not that, I'm not going to say not brilliant, but they're not really that brilliant when it comes to making investments. And there's a lot of times this fear of missing out, and they want to be involved in what they consider they might be missing out. That's one side of the coin. And I'll close my comments with this. On the second side of the coin, I think that one of the gaps is the lack of exposure amongst Black high net worth individuals and qualifying institutions in our community on this asset class. The opportunity to actually invest in a high growth company. Some people just don't think it's possible, or to be a lender rather than just a borrower. And people just don't have that. And so by elevating investors like 1863 and 100 Black Angels and the Angels in Henry's group, people can actually see it. The Links Incorporated just became a limited partner in our venture fund. And last evening, we hosted several hundred of them on a call, on a Zoom, introducing them to Marlon Nichols and Lonnie Johnson and Mandy Price. And they were like, we didn't even know these people existed. And finally, if you're not high net worth, the Jobs Act that President Obama signed in 2012, equity crowdfunding allows everyone to invest in this asset class. So I think it's about exposure and education and being willing to invest in someone from your community.
Yeah, and those are all incredible points. And one thing that I'd add from my point of view is I remember growing up and my dad going to the Salvation Army to go get Christmas presents for me and my sisters. So when someone starts a business from scratch, there's not always a rich uncle or a cousin or a friend, like, hey, we know a grandfather who's been there, done that, that has money. So in the early stages of a company, when the idea needs to get off the ground, that early capital, even before it gets to venture, but it's in that angel group area, that angel group criteria, I think that is one of the biggest gaps is trying to get that first little bit of funding to get your idea out, to prove a concept, to build that first website, to launch the first mobile app. It is there that I think is a huge gap. And so what I'm calling upon is the angel groups to not wait for the email invite of someone I know, because the someone I know usually doesn't look like me. When there's a group of 30 people in a room and they all look alike and they're all 45, 50, 60, and they only hang out with each other and they only hang out with their buddies at the golf course, and most people don't get to that level or in that room, and the gate, the security that prevents someone from ever reaching is you got to know me or know someone else. So I think I highly encourage that first level of opportunity for starting a company, those angel groups, to raise awareness about who they are and be less private about who can get in the door to even start talking about idea. Because I couldn't call mom or dad or cousin or uncle and ask for some money. It just didn't exist. So I think that first, before we get to the institutional, the seed and the A, I just want to compel more angel investors or folks that are part of angel groups to don't just wait for that email from someone figure out how you can get connected to some of the colleges, the scenes, the environments, and find find those early stage opportunities to lift them to the next level.
Wow, that was a very powerful first round, first question. And I think we have a lot of nuggets that just came out of that on how we're thinking about who's holding the capital and where it's going, and just kind of like these opportunities and some of the main barriers that are systemic. One other point I just want to highlight from the conversation yesterday are the issues of trust as well, as far as entrepreneurs even just trusting the system that they're operating in, and just some of the barriers that opens and causes as well. So thank you. And then I just also want to confirm that, Rodney, I agree with your math, the intersection of Black and women, and I will probably try to get you to add that stats to Brookings or something so that I can start quoting that in my research paper. I absolutely love that math. And so thank you for that. We are going to ask a couple of specific questions for you all as well. And I'll pitch it over to you, Rodney, on this one. As we're talking about how to really build these equitable ecosystems, as mentioned previously, Atlanta has really set a precedent of building a space for Black entrepreneurs to move to and get some of the resources that they need. Of course, there are still challenges, but as Atlanta is being called a new Black tech capital, what do you think Atlanta is doing successfully to attract that talent, and what strategies do you think can be applied to other cities?
That's a great question. I'm often critical, as most people are. You're critical of your own work, right? And you're critical of what's happening in your backyard and at your own cookout. And a lot of times, kind of what happens at home stays at home. But I think Atlanta is at a critical inflection point that if we're going to remain that epicenter, one of the epicenters of Black tech and entrepreneurship and capital and equity, is that we've got to be mindful of the influx of West Coast and Seattle-based tech companies that are coming to Atlanta that will bring a density of talent and ideas and ideals that have to be countered for us increasing the density of Black people that are in said ecosystem. We've sort of had an emerging ecosystem to get some wins in. And I'll give you a very practical conversation. So, big company lands, hires 2,500 engineers. They pay those engineers 150, 180, 200. It sucks out the talent so that when an early stage company is looking for a co-founder or a developer, they might get someone willing to do something on the side, but they can't find that person that might have been willing to leave a more, traditional or legacy company as an engineer to come on board. And so I'm not quite sure if people are not seeing past the big announcements of big tech, and I think I saw a big tech announcement about the Durham area, right? 1,000 jobs coming. And I'm like, okay, great. But it reminds me of the Northwestern study a few years ago that basically proved out that innovation density actually exacerbates or increases income segregation and economic immobility. And basically what it means is when you see the regentrification happening in blighted neighborhoods, it's pushing us out, but basically creating these new livable, communities for all. And so I wanted to start with a point of constructive, criticism. I've recently said something that was a little controversial that got picked up in a podcast that said, and a lot of Atlanta natives say this, Atlanta is closed. And I had an asterisk that said, until we get this right. And what I mean is we've got to create a density of Black talent and not just software engineers. Like we need Black academics, Black professors, at these research institutions, at our HBCUs that are working on research that can be commercialized and brought to market. We need boot camps for rapid upskilling, not for like what I call tech janitor jobs. Not that any job is not a good job, if you can provide for yourself, but a lot of people are being steered towards opportunities that are beneath what they could learn. And so I think it's important for us to look at how do we build up the density of tech talent, sales talent, finance talent, ops talent, impact, across the whole spectrum. And so if you're building an ecosystem and you want it to be equitable, you got to think about the unit economics of equity. And I think a lot of people are just a lot of times just so happy to be at the table that when they get at the table, they don't know how to negotiate for equity. And when someone comes with that first offer, and it may be a 7-figure offer, I mean, if you think about it, $2 million for 1 year of programming is different than $2 million for 10 years of programming. And so I think a lot of times we hear the big numbers. And so my advice, and we codified this in 2 pieces of data. One was research out of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City with Dr. Del Gines. You can search it on building inclusive entrepreneurship communities in communities of color. And we put forth our framework of how it starts with early exposure, education and training, career placement, innovation, entrepreneurship, capital, and then access to markets. And so, but that's the playbook. I just, if y'all got that, I just put it out there for you real quickly. And we just got to make sure that the commitments in each of those areas are not performative and that we don't allow, and I'll say this transparently, sometimes a white corporate structure or a white philanthropic structure is only looking to do the minimum and the performative, and we end up taking it a lot of times because we have no other resources to take. And then we have false negatives that occur. And then the output is like, well, we gave them some money and they tried, so that doesn't work. Well, no, you didn't give us enough money and we didn't have time to get it right and to tweak it. That makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. And before I recap on that point, want to just remind or let the audience know, if you do have questions throughout, please feel free to use the Q&A feature and we'll make sure we try to get to as many questions as possible. So just making that note. And thank you, Rodney, on that comment. And we've all witnessed a lot of statements and a lot of commitments. And that was actually another question that we have for the entire group, is we have seen actions that are either very obviously performative, and some, that may have the right intention, but may not be as well informed or guided as they can, as back to the first point we made, or as intentional as they probably should be. What actions and how do we hold these groups that are saying that they want to invest in more diverse talent? Like, what are more sustainable actions that those investors can actually make? And then what is the role of the rest of the community champions in making sure that we're holding those investors accountable?
Well, I jump in partly. So I think that again, your point is well taken, because every day we're seeing somebody and make an announcement or something to that standpoint. And certainly since George Floyd, the George Floyd killing, and I've done a number of interviews where I've said that, and reporters have asked this question about, oh well, we have all these companies making these commitments and people buying black, and isn't that a great thing, and all these things. And I say, well, look, I think anything that brings more capital, for the most part, to the Black entrepreneurial ecosystem is a good thing, right? Now, to Rodney's point, it's not always enough and things of that nature. But at the same time, we really got to look at it for what it is. And several things I say when I talk about these incidents. One is that, just a Buy Black Day, a Juneteenth Day, I mean, that's not going to solve all our problems, right? It's hell, well, once a year we're going to, pick a day of the year, and white folks may decide they want to go find a black entrepreneur to spend their money on, and we're going to collect receipts and tally them up for Juneteenth. I mean, that's not, that, again, anything that introduces black entrepreneurs to a broader marketplace is good, but those things aren't going to ultimately move the landscape fully from that standpoint. The second thing I always like to mention is that, it's ridiculous that the hurdle to get to people saying that they will, kind of bow to their comfort zone and buy from black folks is that people have to die. I mean, why would that be the hurdle that we have to get over, that somebody had to die for people to say, oh, well, maybe we should do something with black folks. And so I always like to point that out. But I will also say this, a couple things. One is that, I read something yesterday where there were a number of banks who have made these major commitments, the $1 billion and $10 billion and things of that nature. And they were pushing back against some of the calls for them to integrate racial equity into their governance. And the statement was that we've done enough, right? I mean, that we showed that we do this, and so we don't want that standard put into our governance now. And so I'm like, okay, well, I sent an email out that some of my team members said, along with the article, that said easy come, easy go, right? Because one day you stand up and say, hey, we're on this commitment. The next day you're saying, well, hey, I think we've done enough and we shouldn't have this into our governance. And so I think we have to be resilient, to your point. And we are, to Adi's point, people of color, black folk, we are becoming the majority. And so you have to find ways to leverage the power that you have, which again continues to be a consumer market, but it all ties together, right? Because you have to, you think about when Starbucks had the issue where they arrested 2 black guys in Philadelphia, and folks, oh, we're gonna boycott Starbucks. Just for clarity, I don't drink coffee, so it wasn't a big issue with me, right? But people, I had folks say, oh, well, is the boycott over yet? I mean, it's like, you if you can't maintain this holding of your dollar, it's going to be hard to really hold folks accountable unless we can build an ecosystem that can actually capture those dollars and things of that nature. And so anyway, I mean that's just kind of a long way of saying that because folks are throwing millions and billions of dollars and add something to actually addressing the root issue. And I think that there's still a lot that needs to happen to address the systematic issues that Black entrepreneurship faces.
Thank you. Any other additional thoughts about sustainable actions? Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I think so much. There's so much depth in this conversation because If we're really talking about unraveling several generations of institutional extraction of wealth and opportunity from our communities, right? And, a couple of things I'm reminded of, we just put out our impact report, and it always becomes this like deep introspective, spiritual, enraging process, because we look at the data, look at our founders, look at the broader market, we do comparisons. And let me just share a couple stats, right? So last year, there was roughly $282 billion raised of venture capital. Black firms with Black GP raised 3.2. Big number, right? But that's 1.1%. Black firms 2.6% in comparison to white firms being employer firms. Right. And we can go down the list, right? So then I'm reminded of W.B. Du Bois and his presentation of Black excellence at the 1900 Paris Fair, and this concept of this double consciousness, right? Like, we are endowed with abilities to do amazing things, but the systems that we're fighting against are so deeply embedded that it's a cultural and a spiritual shift that has to happen, very similar to emancipation. The reason why I say that is this. We see the 60, so McKinsey put out a number, I think it was like $66 billion worth of investments for Fortune 1000 companies, going towards everything from housing to, capital access, et cetera. But then you see these notes about Black people within these same organizations struggling to even be seen and be put in positions of influence to actually bring to light and bring to life some of these challenges. And then we're reminded of, our own Constitution, right? And how we ourselves were written out of it, right? And so I say all those things to say that it's a yes and. It's a fight all across the board. It is the, calling out of the institutional racism at the corporate level. It is a holding folks accountable by being more transparent with data. It's the elevation of stories of founders that are doing excellent work, so we're not seen as a completely separate asset class, right? This is deep work, right? And so there is no one answer for it. However, one of the things that I think we're at an incredible inflection point is the disallocation, the distribution of knowledge and opportunity, not just with blockchain, but we've seen some of our founders leverage talent in Kenya to help do MVP dev work for that founder who doesn't have a CTO, right? So to Rodney's point about those ideas not coming to market just for the simple fact that they can't find a co-founder, we're seeing these things happening. So I believe it's an inevitability that this structural change will happen, but it ain't easy work, and it's a fight on all fronts.
Very powerful points. Any other thoughts there before we kind of talk about the next question? Alexis Summit actually gave a really great question that I think kind of starts to tie into this, but let me know if you all have any other thoughts. So we will move on to this next question. So Alexis was asking, when we are thinking of VCs, how should they think about attending conferences or events or demo days to find Black founders? We're talking kind of on the Southeast end, but would love to also think about it nationally. And when VCs are hearing pitches, what actions can they take to try to be more mindful of their biases and use more of a data-driven approach, as mentioned by you all earlier, in making sure that they're seeing the best investment instead of just having some biases due to who is pitching that idea or company?
I'll chime in to kick this off. I mean, one of the good things that's come out of the pandemic is that a lot of that 200+ billion you talked about, Ade, that was invested last year didn't require in-person meetings and or gatherings. And to some degree, it has leveled the playing field, of an investor saying, well, let me know the next time you're going to be in Palo Alto. And it's like, I'm not. But how many founders like make up a reason to go and say, oh yeah, by the way, I'm going to be there next week. And they spend the money, they get a hotel, and they have the meeting, and the investor was just really there to like offer some mentorship or courtesy. Like you're not in that pipeline. And so I think what's happened last year is this, depth of distance, and somewhat a democratization in terms of not having to spend money to get money. And I think there's something there. And so hopefully, when things open back up and folks are having in-person events again, I hope we don't go back to that standard at all. Because I've made investments last year, this year. I've met anyone in person, and most of the investors and GPs that I know haven't as well. So the second thing is, folks, how do you I don't know if there's a technique. Or, look, we have a new certificate program we're rolling out called DAIS at UNC Chapel Hill. We have an investment certificate that includes Duke as well. And I guess you can give people the information and the data, but it's hard to change what's in their heart and what's in their mind unless they just want to do it. I can't really help you get over your bias except you just do it. Just do it. Look at the deal. And folks will say, well, don't look at that founder as like a Black founder. I disagree with that. No, absolutely. Look at that Black founder as a Black founder. Look at that Black woman as a Black woman. Because if they got to that stage, if they got to the platform, I bet you they had to 10X or 50X or 100X to get there. And that's the person that you should want to bet on. So the whole concept of I don't want to see color, that's the problem. You haven't been seeing us. You haven't been seeing our grit. You haven't been seeing our brilliance. You haven't been seeing our innovation. And then when you do see it, because you haven't looked at it and seen it, you're afraid that it doesn't fit into the archetype that you are accustomed to investing in. But there's where the opportunity is. So I think there is an asset class of betting on different and betting on the unknown, with there being amazing companies, amazing products, amazing services. So if I see all of that in a deal and then the person is Black and is a Black woman, I'm like, that's who I want to invest in. So just do it.
Yeah. I am inspired by Rodney's comments on so many different levels, because he's absolutely right. If they've made it to a point of a pitch, they didn't get money from their family members or friends, because we know the generations of challenges that didn't give them an opportunity to have some startup capital. If they have if they have their first set of customers, that didn't come because their great aunt worked somewhere and got them connected to the first few people that would buy their product, and then sent the viral email that got folks to get their first bit of traction. A lot of times for underrepresented founders, the early product, the early customers, the early investment didn't come purely in network. It came because of a fight. Where on another side of the coin, if we even think of it a different way, just I'll take it one area and bring it right back. Home ownership. In some communities, it's mom or dad that gets the down payment of the home. When you see some people buy their first home, it wasn't them. They didn't buy the money. They didn't save the money. It was just handed to them. It was gifted to them. So when some people get a chance to start a company and they get their first set of capital, it may be them, but it may not. It was just gifted to them. Their first set of customers, it may have not been them or their product. It was just gifted to them. So when you have a certain set of people that just have all of these free, nice gifts versus another set of people that fight for every inch, I'd take the person who scratches with their fingernails to get anything into their hands versus someone who's just, yeah, we'll take care of you. So, so please take notice, beyond a shadow of a doubt, of what Rodney just said. You want the ones who scratch for that inch, because nothing has been given. That's a winner.
Love that, and can apply that in corporate America and in every space. The people who have had to fight a lot harder to get into those spaces, and considering that when you're thinking about that work ethic and the thought that they put into those businesses. And I'll go ahead, I think you were about to mention something.
I was just going to say, I'm always very careful in terms of positioning, because we can't racist people. And, we are changing institutions, but it is in our responsibility to make a bigot a not bigot. You know what I mean? I think one of the things that is an interesting tactical play is, where are the LPs putting money, right? So if you are working for the city in New Jersey and you have a retirement fund, why don't we ask, right? Like, what LPs are you in, right? Like, I would love to have some of my money be put in Marlon's fund, or be put in Lowe's fund, or be put in Base 10, right? Because a lot of these brothers and sisters, they spend a tremendous amount of time, effort, social capital, getting to these LPs to seed that first fund, which puts a lot of pressure to get to fund next. But I think on the other side of the spectrum is that if we get more Black investment professionals at the table, then the other side of it is, moot, right? Because money chases opportunity, right? So if you're looking at and seeing all of the dope deals like Squire and Calendly, et cetera, FOMO is, one of the major parts of capitalism, right? And so I think focusing a lot of the energy around the LPs and the institutions that are placing money in different areas should definitely be part of it.
Thank you for that. And then actually, we want to pitch it back to you for a question, as we're kind of talking about how we're like viewing those that we invest in. Want to also think about like the investor, and would love to hear at 1863 Ventures, you all use the term the new majority as you're looking at deals and as you're looking at companies to invest in. Could you elaborate on the new majority and some of those impacts that you believe it'll have on investments going forward?
Yeah, no, thank you. So we use the term new majority as a way to build power and realize the power that we have as a community. We can, as Black and brown people, be considered to be a minority when we ourselves globally are actually the majority. Now, granted, capital and opportunity is concentrated in this country. We call that apartheid, but the tides are changing. Steve Stout, when he wrote in his book, The Tanning America, right? Like it is happening. Demographics are changing, right? Communities are changing. And there's power to be realized there. The fastest growing segment of new entrepreneurs are Black women, right? That shows in our programs. They're out indexing, not just in terms of performance, but presence, right? And so we use that as a starting point to build power in the narrative, but then we back that up by looking at the performance metrics and the aggregate milestones that our folks have been able to hit. So like on aggregate over the past 2 years alone, our membership has generated over $245 million worth of revenue, representing nearly 2,000 employees. So there's real economic impact that is happening that has to be part of the conversation, so that, as we do our small part to help move the needle forward by investing in companies and building their social capital, we all are operating from a position of strength. So it's important for us to be intentional there, just so even with our own founders, they find the power within themselves, and they can, to Gerald's point, elevate within themselves the fact that they've been able to accomplish a lot in spite of the lack of opportunities, right? So just imagining, and oftentimes we build into our founders a mindset of not looking at raising capital as a binary of I can't be successful if I don't have capital. We look at it from a perspective of really understanding the value creation process. How do you build value within your company so that then you can attract investors, which again puts you in a position of power, because I'm building this. This is what I've been able to accomplish in this short period of time. I'm raising capital. Be part of this or not. Not on the flip side of saying, well, if you can invest in my company, then I can do X, Y, Z.
So thank you for that. And we'll go ahead and jump to a few more audience questions. So a reminder, if you do have questions, please feel free to continue to put them in the Q&A feature and we will try to get to them. So the first question I'm going to ask is, in thinking about access to technical co-founders in Kenya, which was brought up, for the founders who are looking for technical co-founders to help build out the MVP, what steps would you recommend to those founders to network and find co-founders, or I guess more diverse co-founders?
No, I'll chime in there. Building a company is hard. And building your starting or co-founding team is probably one of the most hardest things next to actually building a product. And I get back to like that density conversation we were having in one of the segments. And you gotta get in the ecosystem. And I know that's kind of like this ambiguous, concept, but like, where are the startups convening? And it may be a little bit more harder online because all of the meetups and networks, OHub used to host over 300 in-person events, many of them started by like the members, like it might be the Ruby on Rails meetup or the Python meetup or, the blockchain meetup or, this algorithm meetup. And it might just be 20 people there, but it might be 5 engineers or hackathons. Like you got to go, like, we say where the money resides, you got to go where the engineers reside. So the engineers are at hackathons, they're at startup demo days, they're in co-working spaces, they're in incubators, accelerators. So you kind of got to know where. And in a virtual context, you got to join those communities and then like get in those Slack groups that are out there. And then finding that technical founder is like pitching folks on your idea. And I think a lot of times people come with their ideas like, I don't want to share it. Will you sign my NDA? And it's like, nobody cares about any of that stuff because you really don't have the capital to enforce it. And most people are not trying to steal stuff from you. The startup community kind of work with like an open source mindset. Not that you don't want to be protective and guarded, but you can't be too guarded where you never actually can tell anybody about what you're building. I would also, there are 500 coding boot camps in America. Now these are going to be early developers, but some of them are rock stars, and they might be willing to work on a project with you. And it might take longer. On a college campus, you got to find where the engineers hanging out, right? And not the ones that theoretically talk about coding, but the ones that actually can write code. There are a few shops out there that do MVP development. So sometimes before you find a technical co-founder, or if you don't find a technical co-founder, you can still get your minimum viable product built. And what I tell people is build what you can sell. This game of venture capital and angel and alternative capital, we can't play it the same way that our white counterparts play it, unfortunately. So we can't play it like, well, I'm going to get a family and friends, then I'm going to go get a pre-seed, and I'm going to get a seed. If I get a seed, I'm going to get a Series A. it doesn't always, and I know Gerald, you can relate to this. We treat $1 like that's the exit capital. Like if I get $1, I got to build with $1. And it's unfortunate, but that's where our grit, resilience, and innovation comes in. So there are a lot of like Jasmine Crow at Gooder. She's got a tech startup, getting a lot of traction. She's not technical. Sheena Allen is not that technical, but she is technical. Angela Benton, she's somewhat technical, but she'll tell you she's got a technical team. Savitri Wilson, these are all 4 Black women that have tech companies that were able to get someone to build their MVP in exchange for small amounts of equity and cash. You got to be willing to part with some of your ownership. I see deals, and I'll close with this. I know I'm hacking here a little bit. You got 100% of your cap table, and you want the person that's going to build a product that's supposedly going to make you billions of dollars, and you want to get them 2% of your company. Like, you're not even thinking equitable as a founder. So I think you got to look at what are some of the best practices of how do you compensate that technical person or that person that joins your team in an early stage. But I'll stop hacking for now because I like this type of stuff. So
I'm sure people would love for you to continue to share too. But yeah, we'll move on to Ade.
Rodney's spot on. I mean, you kind of have to gut check yourself and be really honest with yourself, right? Because not everybody, the entrepreneur route is not for everybody. We always try to be as honest as possible with our founders, mainly because we oftentimes put so much at risk. We want to make sure that you are de-risking as much as possible. The most important thing that a founder is, a successful founder, they can sell, right? So just like Rodney had said, just like the Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak duo, right? Like Steve was a designer, idea person. Jobs and Wozniak could actually come up with the technical side of it. He had to inspire the other person in order to be able to bring that vision to market. And you're doing that consistently. If it's, pitching that really dope technical person who, has some time, right, and doing some part-time work in order to help you out, they have to be excited about your idea, which means you have to have put in the work to validate the opportunity, provide for a very clear vision, and be very succinct as it relates to what you think this idea could be. The other side of it is, and one of the founders I advise, actually go through this process now, you can sell the idea before actually having it to market. There are important ethical and technical considerations for that. I'm not saying put together some click stuff and say this is the actual product, but you can use customer discovery for a decision maker. Let's say it's an enterprise customer, to say, hey, listen, I talked to you a little bit about an idea. You expressed to me that you have this problem. Here's some thoughts I put together in some, a clippable prototype, et cetera, Can we run a pilot? Can we get a small contract, right? And then from there, you actually have your first bit of pay that developer who you may have found a couple months ago, right? So you've done the groundwork to not only validate that market opportunity, but then get a small bit of cash from a customer, your first investor, and then bring over to that person, right? So there's not just one way to actually get there. The final thing is, to Rodney's point, it is okay. We've seen many times founders use outsourced resources to get that minimum piece together to then take to a customer, right? And so you don't always have to have a highly technical engineer full-time in order to do that. What you have to be able to do is be a really good product manager, meaning that you can talk to the customer to validate that opportunity, convert that into some capital, and then get that idea to market, manage it with the engineering team and the designer team.
Thank you for that. And as everyone joining us can see, the value of these panelists and being able to provide the perspectives from the investor to the entrepreneur, as well as to kind of like the academic and research background, has been extremely valuable. And I am taking a lot of notes. Would love to kind of ask Gerald, as an entrepreneur in this space, kind of based on this conversation today, like for the entrepreneurs who are on this call, like what piece of advice would you give them? And could you share a little bit about some of the challenges that you've personally faced and what you would like investors to know as well in looking at your company.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the entrepreneurs, if you are, what I did when I knew it was time for me to raise some capital, I knew that I needed to turn myself into a VC. So Rodney was just hanging out with Brad Feld, and I read every book that Brad came out with, Venture Deals, on how to think like a VC. So if you're a founder, train yourself to become a venture capitalist so you know what the investor is looking for before you come to them asking for money. You don't want to beg. You want to define the criteria based on a set of parameters they're used to looking at. So I made myself a VC first before I started looking to raise capital. I took a class at Stanford, Technology Entrepreneurs Ventures program. It was online. It was free. It cost me nothing. My favorite price. So I took that and I was like, get the HELL out of here. Like, I'm watching a VC come to a class and present everything about how to raise money, what to do, where you're going, how to build your slides and everything else. I was like, oh my God. And this was completely free. So first, I highly, highly encourage you, if you dare ask for someone some money, become a VC first. Know what's in their head. And if you can't get through 193 pages, you're going to have a long road ahead of you. So I dare you to become a VC first. Then you can speak the language. Then, because it's a whole nother language. You know English, but you don't know VC. So it's just like Spanish, French, or learning how to write code. It's a different language. So know the language first. And then, so I highly recommend that. Then when getting to the table, you can bring more confidence in your communication with your venture capitalist. But to help on the venture side, I would encourage, because I'm big on, you're always going to hear me talk about that first 25,000, the first 50, the first 100,000. So I'm gonna jump in there for all of the investors that are on the call. I dare you, like I absolutely dare you to reach out to, and it's so easy. Oh my God, every single college dean has their email address on a website. It's just search a college and type dean. And so find every business school and every engineering dean, if you're part of an angel group, and email them and say, in caps, I'm looking for underrepresented founders, and send that out. If we're going to create a new spiral, if you want to be energized to take a step, then reach out to the deans of the business schools and the engineering schools and say, I'm interested. That interest will hit them, and they're gonna be like, oh my God, what do we do? How do we find people? Who can we, are we creating an environment for underrepresented founders? How do we pull them? Actually, we were at a group. Actually, there was a meetup. Actually, let me present at a class that, hey, there's investors reaching out to us. Anybody want to connect or have ideas? So I would say for the best advice I would give a founder is be a VC. And the best advice I would give an investor is to get into the schools, get into deans of business and then deans of engineering, and compel them to introduce you to folks. Because if you're at the same golf club at 8 a.m. hitting the rounds, and you don't know how to break into a network, yes, you do. Just hit Google, name college, business school dean, engineering dean, ask, and they will let you know, or they will be inspired by your request to do something different. And it's in that inspiration that beautiful things happen. So those would be my two pieces of advice. For me, the last thing I would share really quickly would be, is you just got to be, as an underrepresented founder, you got to be 10x more prepared at the table. You got to find a way to get yourself to break through. So what I would encourage you to do is know what your expertise is. Whatever it is, know exactly what your expertise is. Because when you're meeting with investors, you want to tell them, yes, you can share your idea. Yes, you can share what you believe it's going to be. Yes, you can share, where you think trends are going. But share with them with 100% confidence what you're an expert in. And if you could share what you're an expert in, then it'll help investors lean more into you and your expertise. And then you can share with them how you believe the future is going to look. So I encourage you to become a VC, be clear on what you're an expert in, confidently share your ideas. And for every investor, you can compel all of the 4,000 colleges and universities around the country to bring some really awesome folks to the table to let you meet, hang out, introduce, and have a conversation.
Could I add to that, Ariel, just really quickly? Just in summary, what Gerald is saying is like, there's a science to investing, even though there's some guessing in there. There's a science to company building. And what he's saying is like, learn to think like your customer. Your investor is sort of like your customer, and then really like you're theirs as well. It's kind of interesting. But so when you go in, the investor expects you to understand like what's a cap table, the terms of your round, understanding the different types of structures, what's a price round, what's, all of these different things that you can like literally Google and learn. So when you're meeting with an investor, the investor doesn't have to teach you at the same time as you're pitching them. And, I get my inbox and email stares full of people like, can I hear your story? And it's like, well, can I hear your mention? And it's like, you could Google that stuff. Like, it's been so recorded. And we think that taking up space to ask non-essential questions a lot of times gets us in the room. But I often say it's not how you meet or how you know someone, it's how they know you and how they see you. And then the final thing is, in addition to the college campuses, there are Black ecosystem development organizations and entrepreneurship support programs that exist nationwide. So whether it's OHUB or Black Women Tech Talk or Black Men Tech Talk, Hillman, New Me, Founders Gym, these are organizations, Camelback in New Orleans, Black Wall Street in Raleigh-Durham. Like, these organizations are already cultivating Black entrepreneurs. 1863, they invest, but they also help accelerate companies. Div Inc. in Austin, right? So I'm like, if you want to invest, we're already cultivating these founders. So we're like, here you go, please invest them.
Thank you both. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I apologize. One last thing. This is really cool because it's taken me back as well. So I also want to encourage entrepreneurs. When the first two angel investors that invested, I wasn't even looking for money. I was looking for advice on how to grow the first 5 engineers, how to grow an engineering team, how to get a certain task done in my business. So I was working with colleges and universities as partners, as customers. So it was like, who do I know that can reach, that has relationships with colleges and universities? So I was trying to solve problems in my business with wisdom, reaching out to individuals, not asking them for money, but knowing that someone knew something I didn't know that I needed to get a hold of. And then when I started to break into different areas, and people were welcoming me in as a friend, and they had some seniority, some senior level somewhere, then they were getting very curious. So what is this CircleIn? What are you doing? How does it come to life? I'm interested. I may know 2 people that you want to talk to. So I didn't pursue a venture capitalist. I didn't pursue an angel investor. That's not what I pursued. I pursued, how do I solve a problem right now in my business, and reaching out and trying to find experts. And because of their level of expertise, their networks became super accessible to Gerald. When they saw I was hungry, saw I was dedicated, believed in the path, and was like, okay, I might know 2 folks. So you may not need, I would encourage, solve your business problems with experts, their friendship and their wisdom, and then they might just happen to know someone that they can introduce you to, because they are already a believer. They're already a believer. They like what you're doing. They're trying to help you. They're trying to think, and they might make one email that that puts you on a different course.
Thank you. Thank you. So many things we can discuss there. I do want to kind of pitch this over to Henry, as we were kind of mentioning like the roles of the academic institutions. We are, as mentioned earlier, like we want it to be normalized, that everyone has these opportunities, and would love to see, like, Henry, what are some actions that we can take, or what is the role of academic institutions in thinking about developing and encouraging diverse talent, as far as entrepreneurs, but also thinking on the other end, as we mentioned, thinking about how we can get more diverse investors as well. And how can academia play a role in helping with those pipelines?
Well, I mean, I think the academic space is critically important, but I think that, I mean, it all works together. We didn't get to this point of what I call racial inequity by design by accident, right? I mean, the system was designed to do what it's doing, and we're not going to get out of it without being very strategic and intentional around that. I think the academic space, plays a critically important role. What I try to teach my students how to do, and when we think about entrepreneurship, is that the analogy, but being on both the dance floor and the balcony, right? Going from the balcony to the dance floor to be able to understand what's happening on the ground, but also overlooking the overall system. So I think on one level, on kind of the dance floor level, the academic institution can make sure that we're doing everything we can to prepare the next generation of entrepreneurs, giving them these lessons that you hear in my great co-panelists talk about from that standpoint. Also, for me, I also spend a lot of time trying to nurture the next generation of Black investors, right? I mean, so it's not just presenting the students with the idea to go out and start a business and go out and find the capital. It's also that you could also be investors as well. So it's building both sides of that and just kind of building out that ecosystem, because the ecosystem is really important. From the balcony standpoint, is understanding as much as you can through kind of I don't, as I always said, I don't like to think without doing. I don't like to do without thinking, right? And so I try to blend those things together. From a balcony standpoint, it's looking at the system and really understanding why is it, what is happening to that is suppressing the entrepreneurial urge. That's I see so many times that the solution is put forth as if there's something wrong with the individual, right? So it's always, let's fix this individual Black entrepreneur, because they just can't possibly know what they're doing, right? And so we need to create 20 different technical people around them and things of that nature, as opposed to looking at the system itself and saying, well, what is it about the system that is creating this kind of suppression of talent from rising to the top? And so for me, that's as an important role for the academic institution to call out the inequities at that the public sector plays in kind of suppressing the entrepreneurial environment for Black folks and brown folks, that the philanthropic sector, that the investor sector, all those kind of things. Because if I put it into old analogy, if you're trying to grow, if you're trying to create a harvest, you have the seed and you have the field. There's only so you can work on the seed a whole heck of a lot, but if you don't work on the field, then you may see you may have a couple of those roses that grow up out of concrete or whatever you want to call it, but we, as you said, we need to normalize this. And so I think the academic institution can play a very, very important role in pointing those things out and trying to address that field and really making a point of the changes that we're going to really have to see in order to get to the scale that we want to get to, as opposed to being these kind of individual analogies and stories that we can point to and say, oh, now we feel good about it, and let's keep doing what we're doing from a normalized standpoint. So yeah.
And I'm muted. Haven't figured it out after all these virtual classes yet, but definitely want to get to a couple more of the audience questions as we begin to wrap up here. One of the questions someone asked, like, what criteria should angels use instead when evaluating whether to invest in Black founders? basically keeping in mind that Black founders did not have the same level of access to capital, most likely, to get them started.
Yeah, so I think it's an important question, but there's also a moral hazard associated with that kind of concept, right? So when I first started in investment, I worked in India as an analyst for a private equity firm. And so for investors in the United States who wanted to get alpha or growth out of the Asia markets, they looked at it as a completely separate ecosystem with different market dynamics, et cetera, right? Which is true. It's a different country, different governmental structure, different population, culture, et cetera. When we see that concept come to, communities in which we're all part of the same general group, granted there are significant elements of apartheid when it comes to economic opportunity, social determinants of health, et cetera. I think it can dilute the founder by looking at the founder differently. I think the person needs to look introspectively to understand how they actually make decisions as an investor, right? So if you're making a decision and you understand your bias, all right, that's a good first point. However, the fundamentals are such that that founder has to return the capital to you at a minimum 2, 3, 4, 5, sometimes 10x. So then you're looking at, okay, what advantages does this person have in order to achieve that high return? So you're looking at the team, their ability to exploit a market opportunity. Is the market opportunity large enough? Can they execute? So for example, we're talking about a company that does a data platform that helps with health equity, et cetera, right? That founder being of color, coming from some of the same communities by which these problems exist, yes, that is an advantage, right? But I think we do ourselves a disservice when we try to either change the expectations or create a different framework of evaluation for the sake of getting through to the investment. And I may be an outlier in this sense, but VC, the goal of VC is to support really amazing founders. And we know for sure, Rodney has mentioned it, Gerald's one of them, the opportunities are abound. It is the equity around the access, like one of the VCs I talked to said, I want Black founders to be able to lose money as much as white founders, right? So this is risk capital, right? So what oftentimes happens is that a founder the company may not work out, but okay, cool. Here's another opportunity for you, right? That's what we're going towards, not the increased or unfounded or not reasonable expectations of that particular founder, because then that puts founder pressure. It's like, okay, I have a Black founder on my cap table, right, for my firm. Maybe I've done my job, then that's it, right? So that's the different angles to it, but I think there's certain nuances where we want to make sure that it has to elevate the founder and has to really elevate their idea.
Yeah, I like to chime in. When I first heard how the question was asked, I was like, remember, just because our fund managers and founders have been underinvested in doesn't mean like we're charity. And like we're actually talking investment. And so the precedence is investment, the precedence is value, the precedence is returns. So what we also don't want is a flood of people after last year saying, now I want to be a tech founder, now I want to build a product, now I want to be high growth because I'm going to go get this free money. No, first of all, the concept of there being free money doesn't even work inside of a capitalist construct. So I think it's incredibly important there. And I want to kind of double click on what I said earlier, is that rather than showing up as charity, what we're saying is we're presenting to you folks that if you're looking for an edge, as an investor, I'm looking for an edge in my investments. And so I think investing in under-tapped or under-invested communities gives me as an investor an edge. So like if I can give, an opportunity by investing. And that's why I want to say we're not giving people anything. And I think the space does get diluted sometimes by these non-dilutive capital, and you should get all of that. Sometimes pitch competitions give that type of capital, and programs give out that, and grant and sponsorship. I sometimes think that it confuses what this space is about. The space is about multi-generational wealth creation in an accelerated fashion with no pre-existing access to multi-generational wealth. So charity and philanthropy may catalyze it, but it won't solve. We want the investment dollars, and we want to respond and return those investment dollars. But here's another thing. This risk category, 75% of the risk capital fails. Like that 200 plus, Ade, what was the number last year? 280, you said?
Yeah, 282 billion raised last year.
Man, that's almost double in 2019. That means in a pandemic, while 41% of Black businesses were closed and the country was pretty much shut down, Main Street and retail America was shut down, this small class of 3% of the capital stack that's fueling 60% of net new jobs almost doubled last year. That ought to send a signal to every economist, every pundit, every academic or researcher that there's going to be more of these high growth jobs being created with this risk capital. And you know what the ecosystem says with the 75% of companies that fail? They say, well, at least they were employed by the meantime. At least we learned something. At least there was something reasonable, outside of that. Now, that is not an excuse to come to the table like, I'm just going to get some money, I'm going to go fail. You won't get money. So I think, again, it's like this asset class, I keep calling it this alternative asset class. You really, really want to learn this space before you want this life.
And I say this I know we're at the end, and this may be my closing comment, I don't know, but I also want to recognize that, again, that there's a bigger game going on here. And I call it game, but there's a bigger system going on here, right? So Rodney mentioned earlier, I'm in Durham, Rodney mentioned earlier that yesterday was these huge announcements, like Fujifilm's coming and Google creating 1,000 jobs. Well, what often gets lost in this is that there was also a negotiation that happened with the Department of Commerce, with the local government, that provided a whole lot of additional capital to these companies to come to these areas, right? And so I think it's important to recognize that, and this may go out to whoever's sitting out in the audience, that you don't necessarily have to just be an entrepreneur or venture capital to have an impact on the overall ecosystem. Somebody's negotiating these deals. And so whenever a company gets, $20 million for bringing a couple of hundred jobs and things like that, that is de-risking that capital to a certain standpoint. The Black entrepreneur ecosystem doesn't have that at all at this point. I worked in the Department of Commerce. I can tell you this. White guys show up, there's a whole package. They get code names, all these kind of things. And next thing you know, you make an announcement. It's like when Amazon did that headquarters 2, and the whole world was like fighting over how many billions they were going to give them to come there. And so I want to make that point clear, that those are some of the things at the ecosystem level that really continue to create this unfair playing field. And then one level to say, well, hey, we're doing it all on our own, but then to looking behind the curtain and say, well, wait a minute, I pay taxes here too, which means you're getting some of my money to do this. That's important to understand about this idea of equity matters.
Thank you. We could keep going. I have so many questions. One thing I will note is Marlon, Houston-based CDFI, asked if you all could share any resources and programs that may be available. They're trying to start an accelerator. So if you all could just kind of put that in the chat, that way they can see that as we're continuing on. And just to kind of wrap us up, Kevin made a really great point, and we've gone back to this the entire time, that it is a system issue. And we would like to look at changing that system to make it more equitable. So kind of as you're thinking of like a couple of final things, what would you say, 30 seconds, apologies, timing, it's something that we should be hopeful for and thinking about changing this system? Final thoughts. I know that's a really hard question to answer quickly.
I'll knock mine out real quick. So actually, as a follow-up to what Henry was saying is, I think what I'm hopeful about is that there's a lot of opportunity in this ecosystem that doesn't require you to be a founder or an investor. And the real opportunities to like shape ecosystems, be at the table to negotiate these incentives, or reinvent the community benefits package that Mayor Maynard Jackson came out of Atlanta with, is there's a role for you in the ecosystem. And I think academia can lead by convening, but also by leveraging their institutional weight to negotiate racial equity on behalf of all of us. And so don't feel like you're left out of the conversation if you can't be a founder or if you can't be an investor, because all of these companies require brilliant people on their teams where you can negotiate equity and be a part of the journey. But you can also work in the entrepreneurship support programs, the accelerators, the incubators, the coding boot camps, the government policy, which we didn't talk a lot about, but that policy piece, as Henry knows, that's really precedent. That's setting the tone for the region. So we need everybody at those levels as well, and not just saying, I want to be a founder or an investor. Thanks for being here, by the way. It's good to be here.
Yeah, and then for me, my deepest hope is that someone's listening, is that in these conversations, someone's listening and they're gonna think differently, communicate to someone else, be inspired. And I highly encourage everyone that when you see a underrepresented founder, get to know them, get to know their story. How do they get there? Why? Doesn't mean you need to invest. Just get to know. They don't look like you, they didn't come from your neighborhood. Get to know. There's something special there about that individual or what they're trying to accomplish. And there's always something that can happen. Like I got to know one investor, things weren't perfect for us. I introduced them to another African-American founder that they funded. So even if you see someone who is staking their existence on an idea, get to know them, meet them, and then figure out who else is in their network. That's how things are going to multiply. So I'm hopeful that ears are open and the eyes are attentive, and that people are watching and listening, and then we'll be encouraged to go meet and learn stories of African-American founders, and then open up some cool conversations.
And thank you for continuing to put the information in the chat. Any other final quick thoughts before we wrap up today?
Yeah, I it being Women's History Month, and we just finished off with Black History. I'm seeing many parallels between where we are now and the Reconstruction effort, as well as emancipation, and all throughout history. The Black Liberation Movement has been founded on Black women, and when we see the presence and the outperformance and just the amazing grace that Black women bring to the entrepreneurial ecosystem, not just from investors like Drew Burks and of course Melissa, but founders like Marla Blow and Drew Burks again, who exited, right? It brings a narrative change, and from that narrative change creates a collective consciousness about a new world that we can create, right? Like every movement of freedom starts off with the imagination of a life and circumstances beyond where we see ourselves. And then we have that collective vision and we come together as communities. It's accelerated a lot more now, not just because of where we are socioeconomically, but because of the internet, right? And I think the phase that we're in right now is the execution, where people who've been along the sidelines will now have to draw that line in the sand for themselves, but it is happening, right? And so when you just look at folks that come to programs and they're doing an amazing work, pivoting, staying alive during the worst epidemic and depression since the 1930s, and then preparing themselves for that opportunity to thrive, it proves that, you know, we will win. But I think that it also, to the point around the importance of the academic community, we always use data to reinforce what we know as people, right? So Dr. McCoy, you know, writes about these things, Rodney writes about these things, right? That then become part of that justification of why, if you're not with this, you are going to be behind when history is written. So I know we'll win. It ain't going to be easy, but it definitely takes, you know, the work on all fronts, and it's been an absolute honor to be part of this conversation. Thank you so much for having us.
I know we'll win. Will be the mantra for the rest of this year and going forward. Thank you so much for that. And I just want to thank everyone for this amazing conversation. Henry, I'm going to let you close us out. If there's anything else you want to say on behalf of Central and on behalf of Duke, I will let you have that final word.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for spending this hour and change with us. Thank you, Ariel, for moderating this so beautifully. Gerald, Ade, Rodney, for being great kind of co-panelists. I'll finish up like this. This title, Equity Matters, I mean, it's intentional. About a year or so ago, we did a conference called Capital Matters, Race, Gender, and Entrepreneurship. Me and Sandy Darity, Duke and NCCU, we did a class around that. And so equity matters is important because, you know, it's not just capital that matters, it's the kind of capital that matters, right? And this idea of putting, you know, equity capital into this ecosystem really matters, not just debt, not just something that could be collateralized, which is often what Black folks are expected to do is, you know, collateralize these kind of things. And so I hope that all of you all, as you leave here and whatever part of the ecosystem you're part of or want to be part of, keep that in mind, that this idea that equity matters. It matters in terms of, you know, how we think about, you know, people and communities and entrepreneurs, things of that nature, but it also matters in the kind of capital that comes into the overall marketplace. And so with that, I will just give a quick reminder, if you don't know, that NCCU and Duke are also partnering up for something called Pitch, which is for Black founders. The Pitch finals, semifinals and finals will be April 8th and 9th. And so, you know, perhaps, you know, go out and find the information. We'd love to have you a part of that pitch as we pick the semifinalists and finalists. And so Sarah just put that into the chat box. So we'd love to have you as part of that. Thank you again. And I hope you have a wonderful day and weekend.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.